communion, a short little like weird digital communion ritual. If you're into it, I think we can do it in about 4 minutes, and it comes from my invented religion. And then what I'll do right after that is we'll just dive right into this lecture thing. So I'll just say before we start, it's completely voluntary. You can observe it from the distance, or you can participate in it. It is a visualization exercise. So and if you're comfortable, I mean, I will be a little bit guiding you through a visualization, and again, participate as much as you want or as little as you want. So those who would like to, I invite you to close your eyes and visualize yourself in an environment. It can be anything. I mean, it can be your bedroom that you're in. It can be a magical place. Mine personally is a stone circle, but all of the stones are like multicolored technicolor. But any place that you feel comfortable, and a lot of people have come of these places in your imagination anyways. So as you're there, I want you to visualize yourself, but yourself with some form of expanded superpower. And that superpower can be literally, it can be telepathy, it can be something that we already know of. The first thing that comes to your mind that's your superpower, just visualize yourself having that superpower. And then this self that you're seeing, it's you, but you know, because it has a superpower, you might want to visualize a special outfit that you're wearing. Maybe you're wearing what you're wearing right now, but you might also, maybe you're not even a human, maybe you're a dragon or you're another being, whatever you want it to be. Just visualize how you look as the holder of this superpower. Everyone's good with that? I can't hear you, so I'll just assume you are. Then you have some sort of carrying bag with you. It can be a purse, it can be a suitcase, it can be a box, but it's something that you can move with. And carrying bag is important. It's a reference to Ursula Le Guin. We'll talk about that later. Inside of your carrying bag, there are 3 things. The first is a book, one book. And we can use that corny desert island thing. You can have one book with you. Identify for yourself what that book is. The next thing in your bag is a tool of any sort. Maybe it helps you with your superpower, maybe it's not related. Just identify that tool. And lastly, inside of your bag, you have some sort of medicine. But maybe it's not medicine, maybe it's a little crystal rock that heals, or maybe it's something made out of crushed mustard seeds, or soup that your grandmother used to make. Whatever it is, you have that also. So visualize the 3 things in your carrying bag. And then you visualize yourself as the entity that you've constructed, and you see the superpower. The last stage is you give a name to this being. But the rule is, no one in the world can know this name but you. It is your secret name. So it should not be a name that you use in regular life, and it should not be a name that anyone else is already aware of associated with you. So you select that name, affix the name onto this being with its carrying bag. You feel and know the things that you're carrying with you. And the last and final stage before we open our eyes is that we imagine all of us coming into this Zoom group, that we are all coming in as our invented beings. But you don't know what everyone's being is, but you know that everyone who's here has a superpower and is carrying a bag with all of these contents. So as you're ready and you feel powerful with this invented being, come in to the room, this group of superheroes. Okay, we're present. Great. I will go into a little bit more context around this in the second workshop. But for those who maybe won't be able to join that, I'll just say very quickly, this is a trick. It's a tool. You can use this anytime you need to do anything at all, something that scares you, something that's uncomfortable. The fact is we have a plurality of beings that we have access to with our imagination, and the simple act, someone once said to me, and I totally agreed with this, that shamanism can be popularized by the term or by the phrase, you fake it till you make it. When you put on the mask, you are the god. And so by invoking whatever your imagination comes up with, you can do anything that you imagine that you're capable of, etc. But the other thing I like to feel is a collection of people, of beings coming together, and we know everyone in this room has a secret superpower, and that they're developing that together. So yeah, so I'm doing a PhD, practice-based PhD, look my own practice in relationship to the phenomenon of invented religions. So I'm trying to do a sort of a concise run through of all. I'm going to skip over some things. It's going to be introductory. I'll stop in some parts, but if there's anything that you want to talk about more, if you're not able to join the second group, my email address is on the bottom of, or in the syllabus. You can contact me. I'm very happy to send resources and talk more. So just before I go any further, I'm an artist and a cultural engineer, but I'm also a scholar of religion and a theologian of sorts, a queer theologian. And it's important, I was artist in residence at the Theological Seminary. My PhD is involved in the theological department of University of Edinburgh, as well as the art department. So it's really important to start off by saying I'm using this word religion. And it's a really complex and problematic word because, of course, this is a multicultural, multi-geographic consortium here. And I'm sure many of you come from broad ranges of religious backgrounds, or you may come from a sort of a cultural frame that has a spiritual practice but wouldn't be called a religion or anything like that. To be clear, I am using the word itself, religion, which is a Western construct, which arguably came out of a Judeo-Christian framework. So one of the major problems we have in like religious studies and when we're looking at how religion operates is the assumption, which is grounded in sort of a Judeo-Christian idea that religions are, that we even know what a religion is. We don't. Religion, what we see and what we look at in terms of religion follows a kind of unconscious formula which has been developed through the Judeo-Christian academy. So I just say that I use the word, when I'm talking about religion and when I'm talking about religions here, I'm talking about the construct. I'm not saying all religions are the same or that anything, that's not my claim in any way. So the word religion comes from Latin, comes from religare or religare, which means, loose translation, to bind again. So the assumption surrounding this term is that there was an original connection which somehow was broken. And through the process of religion or religiosity or the practice, you rebind, or you continuously rebind. And in one of the things we see in religion is a lot of repetition and practice. So that rebinding is important. So as an artist, I mean, it's kind of my catchphrase. I am inventing a religion as art. I've tried to assemble books so that I can do like a kind of, I don't know if you guys know Ian Bogost, American philosopher. It's a really interesting book called Alien Phenomenology and What It's Like to Be a Thing. And he proposes a really interesting concept that I've absorbed that's central to my work, which is called carpentry. And he says that typically philosophers will, or people who are dealing with some sort of conceptual project will explore it and tease it out through the typical format of a book or an essay. But artists and a lot of other cultural workers also use this thing he calls carpentry, wherein it's a philosophical process of making something to understand how something works. rather than learning about it, researching about it, trying to understand it from this sort of objective distance, the making is part of the understanding. So using Bogost, I would say that I'm constructing a religion in order to understand how religions are constructed. Oh, I just saw this message. What's the name of the book? Alien Phenomenology. Sorry, I'm new to Zoom, so I just saw that. In effect, I mean, I have a multidisciplinary practice, much like probably everyone, but I utilize what I call, I've coined this term, religious prosthetics. And a religious prosthetic is any sort of item, or actually, in a way I say that it's, hold on, let me get my notes here. Visual, performative, sonic, or literary devices that have a time-honored religious significance, meaning I utilize motifs and iconographic structures, largely from Judeo-Christianity, because I was raised Jewish, and I grew up inside of a Christian-dominated environment. But I utilize these forms in order to experiment with and research how to construct a religious experience. And that's maybe the core of my question, is what do we mean when we say a religious experience? What is involved in a religious experience? And what is it possible with the right sort of combination of media to produce a religious experience? I think the answer is yes, but that's kind of, but my work is the question. So yeah. Okay, I'm gonna sort of skip over something that I had said because I'm looking, it's already 6:16. So I use ritual performance, I do museological installations of invented artifacts, I compose scriptures. I'm also, if you can see over there, I make these, actually it's not a good example, but I make these things called hyper icons, which are light boxes that resemble stained glass windows that you would find in churches or other religious centers. They're light boxes, but instead of the sort of panels of just image, they're pages of a graphic novel splayed out. So from the distance, you can sort of engage with the visual materiality of my fictional religion. But if you go up close, or if you take home the comic, you can read the narrative. I also write psalms, like religious music. I've invented languages, one principal language and a few sub-languages. The principal language that I'm inventing, I'm working with a linguist, and it's a queer language. So it has no gender signifiers, but it also has no nouns. So every being, everything is a process. So everything is a verb. It's a challenging thing to do. So I have an alphabet, but then I'm also building the vocabulary slowly with this linguist. And I sing, I write music, and I sing in the invented language, as well as English and with synth. And I'm working on an album with like a team of musicians and engineers and stuff. So that, I also have an online digital temple, which you can visit. It's also in the syllabus. It's templeofartifice.com. It's like a web experience that you can undergo. And that's just a sample. There's a broad range of other things that I do in relationship to this. But as I said before, the core of it is I'm examining what is involved in creating a religious experience and having a religious experience. So invented religions, I'm obviously not the only person in the world that is inventing a religion, but the idea of invented religions, it's something that's sort of coming into the scholarship in religious studies and in sociology. It's been in the last 10 or 20 years that they've been, through the study of new religious movements, there's a sort of a particular branch of invented religions. And it's also a complicated term because we could argue that all religions were invented, but invention is linked with the individual and the genius and even the Renaissance in particular. So there's also a few other terms that are used to describe it. Another one is called fiction-based religions, and the other term is hyper-real religions, referencing Baudrillard. The fiction-based religion title is also important because one of the things that we see with all of these invented religions, largely since the 1960s, is that they tend to center around either a sci-fi or fantasy story as scripture. So it's not specific to literature, but it involves media, etc. But big examples are Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and The Matrix. But there's a bunch of them. And what we see happening is that fans become religious about the work, but they tend to actually believe, not necessarily that the work inherently has spiritual meaning. Many of these sort of practices tend to perceive that the author or artist was channeling some sort of story or mythology from beyond. So there's a big Tolkien religion around Lord of the Rings, and they perceive that Tolkien was just a kind of like a prophet who absorbed this narrative and gave it to the world in this way, but Middle Earth and his fantastical universe exists. And so a lot of these people, many of them consider themselves elves. They think they are that, and they have rituals and practices. And one of the interesting things around it from the study of religion is there was a big debate, it's still going on, but whether or not these are really religions, you know, and what separates fandom and cosplay from belief. But the argument tends to move to the other side, because these people do believe and structure their lives around actually a belief in that the narrative is secondary. The narrative is just the way that it was transmitted to the world. We don't know, actually, we don't know the people that wrote the scriptures. We don't know anyone who wrote the Gospels. We can't confirm their identities. It's just, we trust that something, or we believers trust that it came through them. So I'll talk just really briefly about Timothy Leary. Is everyone more or less familiar with Timothy Leary? Or I guess it's funny to, okay, so Timothy, so in that 1960s counterculture in the United States, a kind of crazy thing happened. The Central Intelligence Agency of the United States was researching, they wanted to find a super drug which they could use to give to captive enemy soldiers in order that would make them tell the truth. It was called a truth serum. They were searching for this, and they came across LSD, acid, the hallucinogenic drug, and they thought that they had found their super weapon. It was supposed to be a super weapon by the military, and they bought a bunch of it, the American government, and then they gave it to psychiatrists to start to test out on complicated cases. But it backfired because a bunch of the psychiatrists started to take the drug themselves, including Dr. Timothy Leary. And when he took it, he had a religious experience, and he was very interested in, I share a number of interests with Timothy Leary, so he is one of my big figures in my thesis and in my work. So he was also interested in what was a religious experience. Did you need a religious institution to facilitate a religious experience, or could people just have religious experience? And the thing that he discovered with LSD was that here you had people of vastly different cultural backgrounds and vastly different religious upbringings who all took this drug and had a new shared vocabulary of mystical experience that was outside of the church, outside of the mosque, outside of the synagogue, outside of any form of institutionalized religion. And he was referred to as the most dangerous man in America, potentially because of this. In a way, and in addition, he was pushing LSD and sort of, he was a leader of the hippie 1960s countercultural movement, but he had a deep conviction that that drugs, particularly hallucinogenic drugs, were the original sacrament. So, you know, in the church, or the Catholic Church, you do the sacrament where you eat the bread and the wine, and it's a symbolic ingestion of the body and blood of Christ. His argument, and he was not alone in this, there were several people who were saying that bread and wine was a replacement. In actuality, the sacrament always was some form of hallucinogen, sacred mushrooms, or other forms of drugs that facilitated mystical experience. So he, in 1967, he wrote a book called Start Your Own Religion. Sorry, I was just thinking I should open my chat box so I can see that. But yeah, so he wrote this book called Start Your Own Religion, where he basically said what I just said. In order to, I'll use a contemporary terminology, in order to unplug from the matrix, or the way he said it at the time, in order to remove yourself from the fake prop TV studio set. That's what he called sort of mainstream American life. In order to remove yourself, you need to create your own religion, because he said we were all pre-coded by religion growing up. It's like in our DNA, it's in the core of our thinking. So in order to liberate ourselves, we need to use that code structure, but then almost like a recipe, but then put in our own ingredients in replace of the ingredients provided by the church or the state or the dominant religious idea. So really this book, Start Your Own Religion, is a manual. Arguably, it could be said as a manual of how to start a cult. But on the other hand, it could be said as a manual of how to literally remove yourself from the state and create a new society. And one of the central things, on top of the fact that he said that, you know, LSD, the sacrament, it's really important. That's how using the psychedelic is how you break the, oh, okay, that's not anyone here. Using the psychedelic is how you break the link with the matrix. But then after that, you have to build this religion. And one of the things he said is you need a mythology. You need a central myth system. So you can choose any story, and then that becomes your scripture. And you have to compose that story, transform that story into a guidebook for life. And what we see with most scriptures is you have annual readings of them, right? So in Judaism, where I was raised, the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, every week of the year is sort of aligned with a particular passage from that. And so you're supposed to read that story again and again and again and again in ritual. Basically, Leary was saying, you can do that with any story that you like. You can turn that into it. And ideally, he said, you want to look for a mythological figure who has somehow died and been reborn. There's some problems with that, but that's largely what he was saying. So from this point onward, we get a bunch of these invented religions. And it started with Tolkien and a lot of hippie movements, and people took the names of characters from The Lord of the Rings and created religions around them. Later in the 70s, we have Star Wars and Jediism. Jediism emerged as a religion in the 90s, and there's several Jedi churches that you can actually become ordained online. You can join in a community of others, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the Matrix is the most recent one, and there are a couple religions that came out of it, but the key one is called Matrixism. And I'm going to go more into detail on that one in the next session. So I'm just being conscious of time. I have about, I think, 10 more minutes on this lecture front. So I'm going to leave the matrix stuff for that, but I'll just say that in terms of my own practice, what differentiates my work from those, what I just described, is that in most cases, all these invented religions are created by the fans. And in almost all cases, the authors or the artists deny that they channeled any messages, or they deny that they were intentionally trying to create any sort of religious story. But the Jediism or Tolkienism or Matrixism is created by people who experience the work and then take it and put it into a new form, which is the invented religion. In my case, I'm doing 3 things. I'm creating the mythology which is really, it's a sci-fi, ancient future, queer universe, multi-generational, like really Tolkien-esque. There's many layers to it. So I write and illustrate that mythology. And then I am, you know, as this exercise, like the carpentry I said before, as a philosophical exercise, I'm then trying to use that story to produce new rituals, new relics, new artifacts, and play with how that mythology becomes a religion in my practice. And then the third part is that I then analyze, as kind of a scholar of religion, as a bit of an anthropologist, I analyze how my religion artwork participates in culture. Sarah Thornton is an anthropologist who wrote, she did ethnography on the art world. She wrote a book called 7 Days in the Art World. And in it, she referred to the art world as a church for atheists. And I found this quite interesting because you know, a lot of the work that I did was in performance. There's always usually some performative element that involves ritual. And I have observed that millennials more, but generally art audiences and sort of countercultural audiences are very interested in ritual without dogma. And I think that by creating this religion as an artwork where I'm not in any way saying, hey, come join my religion. Instead, I'm saying I'm an artist presenting this religion as a kind of artifact that you can look at, participate in, experience, play with, but as art. The peculiar thing is that a number of people have said to me or written about my work that they had a, quote, religious experience in my work. And these were generally people who define themselves as secular. So people that, for instance, well, no, I don't want to summarize it because they're different case studies, and sometimes it's people that say to me privately, and sometimes it's people that write about it. But ultimately, that they did not intend to have a religious experience, and they intentionally avoid religious experience, but somehow inside of what I created, they did. I am not in a position to be able to give psychedelics to an audience. I would really like to. To be honest, I mean, I actually thought maybe in Holland I could. I'm not sure if it was voluntary. I just thought about that today when I was preparing this lecture, but in my mind, I'd always thought like, okay, that's something that I could do secretly and privately, but I can't unify an audience into that shared journey using the actual psychotropic because of law. But I mean, I have a spiritual, I have my own spiritual practice, and I think my performativity is informed by that. But I also produce an environment utilizing all of these, as I said, religious prosthetics, and I tell this story and I activate and I use music. Music is a massive power in producing said religious experience. So I feel as though I am able to produce that, particularly for people that that are very suspicious and hesitant of it. And I think the safety of that comes in the fact that it's art. You know, the art is the holder that makes it safe. And I'm always asked the same questions like, is this a real religion? Are you seeking followers? And I strategically don't answer those questions directly, because I think the questions are more interesting, because there's this point where I'm at this point in my thesis where I'm trying to put this into words, but there's this tension point. It happens a lot in performance art in general, even if it's not religious, where you can tell people are asking themselves how far they want to go into this experience. And when you go to an art gallery and there are objects and you have a sort of a distance and it's an opening and people are talking, you are still, you can still be sort of intellectual and objective, and, but with performance, and in particular performance that has a deep ritual aspect, there seems to be this threshold where some people choose to go in and some people quite literally choose to move back. And I also love this about performing in museums and galleries as opposed to theaters that have chairs, because in performance, in museums and galleries, people literally are moving around the ritual or the event in relationship to how they feel. Some people want to be really close up. Some people want to, a lot of people like to be up against the wall. And so there is this point, and I'm really interested in this point, and what ingredients or what dimensions allow certain people to sort of break past that point and then have their own religious experience inside of my work. So good. Just, I think I've got 5 more minutes and then we'll go to questions and a talk. The first document that I put in the syllabus, which was from, it was from an exhibition that was done in Germany called Medium Religion. It's a hard book to find. If anybody wants anything from it, I'm happy to scan. But it was this article about religion as medium. And I think this is maybe where I'll end off. Also, like, I mean, in terms of this connection to, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. I am an anarchist fundamentally, and Emma Goldman was central to my development early on. Obviously, dance plays a role in this, and I interpret dance, or maybe even choreography, to be how bodies move through space and performative bodies move through space. And I don't call myself a dancer. I was trained in Buto, which really helped me, I think, to in terms of the physicality of my ritual processes. But the big thing I think I want to share in this dialogue is this notion of religion as medium. And Weibel, who wrote that essay, goes so far as to say that religion is the proto-medium. Religion is the first medium. And therefore, he says, all media have at their core religious coding. So these are just a couple quotes from that article that I thought were really important. Religion was from the outset not only tied to media, but was itself a medium. Technology comes close to some of the promises made by theology. The overcoming of time and space, the promise of eternal life, in the way that we store things in hard drives. And I was even thinking about this in terms of right now and the role that media is playing in our lives in this crisis, and even this very moment, University of the Underground, all of us gathering here, in effect to, you have a larger program, but to share thoughts and ideas and commentary and connect, blah, blah, blah. Bible basically says all media, drawing, writing, photography, the telegraph, telephone, film, radio, TV, video, computer, and the internet, they are all the technical redemption of religion's promise. So he says that teletechnology is theotechnology. Tele, from the Greek, refers to space and time distances. Television, telephone, it's a breaking down of a space and time barrier. So in addition to the sort of spiritual dimension of my question that I'm asking about what constitutes a religious experience, I also recognize that as artists working in the information age with media technologies, regardless of whether or not our intention is to produce or comment or explore religiosity, I am interested in what Bible suggests in that we are participating in a kind of religious dialogue or using a religious form, even if it's no longer called that. And even I don't know how many of you as artists work in museums, but the whole model of the museum comes out of the model of the temple. Aesthetically, architecturally, at least in its onset, and the way that even when the French Revolution sort of opened the doors to public access to art, this echoes processes of temples being open to public access of art. And I live in Rome, where if you want to see Caravaggio, mostly you go to churches that are free and that are open. And that's, the art that is stored in churches functions very much like a a gallery or museum. So yeah, so I think that I can leave it there for